Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be the second of 3 videos that I always do on my channel to round off the year in Avatar. The first one you probably saw a few weeks ago go up in the channel. That was my top 5 story moments for Avatar and Korra in 2021. Basically the sort of new content year in review. This video is going to be the 2021 Avatar year in review. So overall, we're going to bring in the news, the story content, as well as merchandise, and just overall how was the year for Avatar for 2021. And then right towards the end of the year, I will put out my 2022 Avatar story and merchandise preview. So obviously that is a preview ahead of what we expect for next year. Just before we jump into the content of this video, let's go over the fact that I have YouTube channel membership enabled on my channel. As you can see here, I have 2 tiers available if you are interested in supporting the channel. We have the $1 tier, the Light Spirit tier, and then the $5 tier, which is called the Avatar tier. At both tiers, you gain access to the loyalty badges next to your name in the comment section and live chat, as well as custom emojis that you can also use in the comments and live chat. I do live streams, but especially in the second half of the year, there hasn't really been a lot of things that have maybe warranted me doing them. But I can do live streams now, and they will be coming in the future. So I think those are cool things to have. The main difference with the Avatar tier is that you will also gain access to exclusive videos that I put out. So usually this is once a month, sometimes it's 2. A lot of these are video game videos, so it's the only time I can record gameplay and put it up on the channel, and they are exclusive videos. So I have recent ones in terms of like Forza Horizon 5, I have some like Hitman 3. I think the one I'll be doing in the next kind of week or so will be a Halo Infinite campaign video, as well as other stuff. Like there's a backlog of exclusive videos that includes like Lego builds and stuff like that. So very interesting stuff. And then the other thing you get for the Avatar tier is that you will be thanked at the end of some of my bigger videos. So with that out of the way, let's move into the video. So how do I go about judging a year in Avatar? Well, I judged the quality of a year in Avatar on 3 things. 1, new story content. Even though I already did a separate video covering the new story content, it still is a huge determining factor in the year for overall how it went. In that if a year has no story content, can you really call it almost a year in Avatar? Like, that's how important it actually is. 2, merchandise released. So the key thing here is the word released. It's the merchandise that actually came out, you could buy, and you got this year. It's not what merchandise was announced this year, it was what was released this year. And then the final thing is key news from the year. Like I say at the bottom there, I weight new story content heavily, with merchandise being more of a bonus than the thing that makes or breaks a year. And then news, it completely depends on the details. Of course, this year we have a very significant piece of news, but we'll get to how significant that was in terms of being a make or break thing for the year. So you get a sense for story content usually defines most of it. Merchandise helps, but is usually not the biggest thing in that. What does it say about a year if it's just a sheer massive amount of merchandise that's the only notable thing? That's the point I'm basically making there. So let's jump in. We start with new story content. Again, I already covered this in the previous video in terms of the more detailed kind of analysis of key moments. But these were the new books that we got this year. So we got Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy, we got Suki Alone, and that rounded off the kind of the first one-shot trilogy for Avatar comics. We then got the Free Comic Book Day book for 2021, which includes a Korra and an Avatar story. So that was the first time ever that we'd seen both parts of the franchise included in one free comic, and that was really good. And then I suppose it has to be included here, but the Avatar cookbook does technically have new content as such in its flavor text, but ultimately it played no real role in like changing how we viewed story content in 2021. It's just here because I think it makes the most sense for it to be here. And I think the interesting thing about the lineup of especially like the news story content books is just that it's good. Toph Beifong's Metal Blade Academy was a good book. Suki Alone was very good. The free comic, I think, really surprised everyone. And the cookbook was fine. The problem with this is that I think our expectations are sort of changing a little bit. We have to remember that this content that we got is under this new system that Dark Horse is working with, where they are doing sandbox style stories. And that's why it's really interesting to note that this year had no significant story content. The one-shot books are basically just slightly longer short stories, and then the free comic is just short stories. So there was no true advancement of the story. We didn't do anything in Avatar post-Imbalance, we didn't do anything in Korra post-Runes of the Empire, and we didn't tackle anything in any other era of Avatar. This was a very limited year in Avatar that ultimately the highlight of which is the Suki stuff with the backstory and what that book did. That was definitely a highlight, and then the free comic I think really helped towards the end of the year. But overall, it was not the strongest year for story content at all. And I'll make this point more towards the end of the video as well, but the lack of a novel this year, the first year in, after 2 years of having a novel in 2019 and 2020, the Kyoshi novels, it was really felt not having one this year, not having that huge, massive piece of content that heavily explores a new aspect of the world was really felt, and that has to be acknowledged. In terms of other books that came out this year, you can see here we had the reprint art books, the second edition for Korra Book 1, Korra Book 2. We had the omnibus editions for The Rift and Smoke and Shadow be released this year. We had Screen Comics Volume 1, Screen Comics Volume 2. We had the 2022 calendar be released, in addition to the Kyoshi novel box set. Again, this was a relatively fine, I think, release schedule. Because of delays is basically the reason we didn't get, I would say, the Book 3 art book this year, and we didn't get North and South omnibus this year. Because I think in the 2021 preview video I did last year, I predicted that we would get those books this year as well. But I think because of delays that happened to everything, they ended up falling just into the start of next year, when they realistically, I think if we didn't have as many delays this year, probably would have seen those books actually released this year. The Screen Comics were definitely the most forgettable and least interesting books that we saw this year, to the point where it seems like the exact format of them has been cancelled, in that there doesn't look to be a volume 3, and they're switching over to a slightly different style of things, which obviously isn't great if you are collecting them. Calendar was a very nice piece of merchandise to get, a huge celebration of the Kyoshi cover artist and stuff like that. And then again, another surprising release throughout the year was definitely the Kyoshi box set, and the fact that it had special edition content in it with the kind of deleted chapter with commentary. The fact that they didn't mention any of that in the marketing just adds to a point I'll make more in the middle of the video about the lack of communication about a decent amount of these products throughout the year. But overall, a decent selection of books, just let down by not really having that one book that is just, that was it this year. Suki Alone kind of is that, but I don't think it's strong enough that you could say it in any way matches up against, say, The Rise or Shadow of Kyoshi. So the kind of sum up of the story content of books is that a good but light year for new story content. After the Avatar Studios announcement early in the year, we expected better than this. Instead of a big year getting things back on track, we got only short story content and not a lot of communication about what is next. Lack of communication and delays only served to create a very frustrating 2021. I played it safe with my predictions for this year and was still off. 2022 has to get things back on track. That there's only so much value I think you can have in saying that this was a good year and trying to be really, really positive without acknowledging that there was a lot of stuff that probably should have happened this year that didn't for whatever reason, but we were never communicated to about a lot of this stuff. And the fact that a lot of announcements only happened right at the end of this year is another thing that adds on to that. So that's the story content for this year. So definitely lighter than the previous 2 years, and also not surprisingly hopeful for next year either. But we'll switch over to news. So this is the first year in a while where news can actually, I think, change how you view the year. Usually it's the story content with a little bit of merch. This time the news actually plays a role. So the first and most obvious piece of news to cover is Avatar Studios being announced. And what's so interesting about this is we sort of had a sense that something like this was happening. This didn't just come out of nowhere. We went into that event with the slightest sense of expectation. I don't think anyone expected it to be this level of an announcement, maybe just a third series. But we got more than that. But it's such a weird announcement to look back on because this announcement hit in February, so right at the start of the year. And just reflecting on it now in December, right towards the end of the year, does it feel like a year where we got this massive announcement? And I would definitely say no. For multiple reasons I'll get throughout the video. So, a huge announcement from February, a piece of news that solidifies the future of the franchise. The issue is that by the end of the year, you almost forget it was announced because there was no follow-up announcement. This news changed expectations for the year, and nothing that happened afterwards really met those expectations. The lack of news about Avatar Studios combined with this seemingly being what is holding back other content ended up making it a surprisingly frustrating announcement. Avatar Studios will be big eventually when it becomes the focus and we learn what the projects actually are. But for 2021, this felt like it was perhaps announced a bit too early. And I think the big problem with this is just the fact that there's the only visual is the Avatar Studios logo. Everything else is the most minor of minor little updates on this and just a sense for the scale of the project and what Avatar Studios as a studio is roughly planning to do. The fact that we didn't get any real sense for what any one of the projects actually is in terms of it's a movie but it's set in this era. It's about ATLA, it's about Korra, it's about Wan, it's about Kyoshi. We got none of those specifics that could get the fandom talking over the course of the year. So it's a weird announcement that felt very confined to February. This lasted for a couple of weeks to a month. And then everyone realized that there's only so much we can talk about this thing when no information is being presented. The fact that every other little thing after February we learned about Avatar Studios was almost felt like it leaked, even though it technically comes from like official sources. Like the main extra news in addition to that February announcement was probably that the movie is going to be in CG, and then the later confirmation through job postings that the CG style is going to be like a combination 2D CG kind of hybrid. The fact that those two pieces of information effectively came from like a weird official Viacom interview with like one of the Nick execs, but then he just slipped in that the movie is CG when we didn't know that before. It wasn't an announcement as such. The fact that we end the year with only knowing like what 4 members of Avatar Studios, Mike Bryan, Jeremy Zuckerman, and Joan Hilty, is also super, super telling. And that really the only proper mention of like Avatar Studios like doing stuff this year was Magpie Games mentioning that they're working with Avatar Studios to get stuff approved. Otherwise, like Avatar Studios went dark for like the whole rest of the year. To be fair, again, no one expected anything to release this year. But I think it is fair to have expected some sort of like additional piece of information that maybe just gives some specifics. But that now has to come in 2022. I don't think we can go through a whole other year without getting any of that stuff. They have to say something. next piece of news. New books announced, but not the ones we were expecting. So I'd say I spent the majority of the year talking about this very topic. When are the new books going to happen? What's going on? Like, what are these announcements? The book announcements for 2022 were slow to happen and are just not the most exciting reveals overall. We have a chibi comic that has very little hype behind it. We have a new Korra comic, but it's a short story collection which people have doubts about, rightly so, after the quality of Team Avatar Tales was less than we wanted. And then it's another free comic book day book, which they're cool when they eventually come out, but I don't like that they are so late to give information on these things, that we probably won't find out more details about this until the cover gets released, like who knows how long from now. Beasts of the Four Nations is probably the most exciting new book of the group, but the information and how this book got like announced and what still is happening with this book is just all over the place, and it leaves us in this weird situation where every one of these books has something kind of weird with regards to its release, whether it suffered lots of delays, the announcement is only like half taken place or something like that. And then you have to add on to this, like, where's our mainline books? Where's the next Avatar one-shot? Where's the next, like, Avatar comic that continues the story post Imbalance? Where are Korra one-shots? Where's the next Korra trilogy that we knew was in production at some point, but we haven't heard anything about? I think it's pretty clear that there probably are other books still to be announced, because this more or less only covers, like, into, like, the middle part of 2022. We'll get more books announced, but why the delay? Why this gap? And this goes into the Avatar Studios thing of, it feels like Avatar Studios has had the effect of just slowing down Dark Horse, and that's the reason we're not learning much about the actual details of this. Because if Patterns in Time is Team Avatar Tales quality, it's not going to really change the year all that much. Aang's Unfreezing Day is a chibi comic, and we don't know if it's even going to be canon. And so I just worry that I criticized the story content this year for being pretty light. It could be much the same for next year as well, and I hope that's not the case. Next, continuing off this, delays and lack of communication. This ends up always being a topic on these videos, but this year especially felt very, very bad. Again, given Avatar Studios was officially announced and then nothing said about it, so the communication becomes a big problem. COVID and the shipping crisis can explain a lot of these issues for 2021, but I don't think you can use them to explain everything away. Dark Horse had another super messy and disorganized year, with every release they put out having at least one delay, if not more. The worst of the bunch being the chibi comic getting announced in February, only to receive 5 separate delays before the end of the year. And now it's far enough off into the future in next year to where it might even get delayed again as we actually head into next year. So really bad communication on a book that again has very little hype behind it. Or is Beasts of the Four Nations actually worse, because it received nearly as many delays as that, along with an indefinite postponement for a certain amount of time, and then the fact that Dark Horse have still never publicly acknowledged that the book exists. Beasts of the Four Nations is still not listed on the Dark Horse website, and they haven't really said anything about it. It has a date once again, but I don't think many places are acknowledging that date. So what's going on with this book? I would be forgiving of Dark Horse if this was unusual for them to have this amount of delays. But the problem is that they have had years pre-COVID where they've had just as many delays as they're having now in the middle of COVID. So I don't think Dark Horse, get the benefit of the doubt of like, oh, you must have really struggled this year because of COVID. I'm sure they did, but Team Avatar Tales came out pre-COVID and it was one of the worst delayed books we've had. And we saw a lot of that this year. So there's that. Continuing on with this, it's not all Dark Horse. Nearly everything Avatar related has been delayed to some degree. Most merch has been pushed back at least a little bit. Some other key delays from the year were Abrams Books delaying the paperback versions of the Kyoshi novels into 2024 after multiple previous delays having already happened to them over the last 2 years basically. Most recently, we had the Avatar Legends role-playing game get delayed. Again, I'm critical of Magpie here because it seems clear that this was always going to happen, but they held off on confirming the delay until very late in the process, after refunds had been closed and all this other stuff. When I thought it was pretty clear the second the campaign came to an end, they probably should have immediately moved to just be very open with people and confirm the delay, because it felt like in the end, the 3 months of updates amounted to, yeah, we were never actually going to, get enough printers, schedule things well enough to actually hit these times. And why didn't you just say that in the first place? So they tried to communicate, but they did it poorly enough where they made people frustrated, even though they tried to avoid that. And that is very weak communication in my mind. Next up, Avatar live-action Netflix show starts production. So in November, the live-action show officially started filming, and a lot of the cast was officially revealed. So far, the communication and details have been met with a pretty positive reception from the fan base, even if a lot of fans are still very skeptical about the show overall, especially after Mike and Brian left the show, and now that we have Avatar Studios coming. It means the pressure is off the show to a certain degree, but when it does come out, I do suspect it will still be probably, critiqued just as heavily as you would expect it to be. So there's still a lot of pressure on, but they're communicating well. They're giving pretty regular updates on new cast members, and that's good to see. Just them doing that is better than a lot of other Avatar stuff this year, and that has to be acknowledged. So next up, the Braving the Elements podcast. So again, a pretty exciting announcement, like an official Avatar podcast hosted by the voice of Korra and the voice of Zuko, Janet Varney and Dante Basco. Sounds fantastic. This is probably something you should have done years ago. The issue is that that's completely the way it feels. This podcast feels like, yeah, it should have been 10 years ago, and it feels a little off because of that you're doing this thing reflecting on the show from so long ago. And it was fine early on. I think a lot of the early stuff felt like, oh, that's cool, that's exciting, you have a Mike and Brian interview. But then it became really just clear that you were going very slowly through the episode reviews, really slowly, needlessly slowly through these. And then I found a lot of the interviews to ultimately, after a while, get pretty repetitive, where the voice actor interviews are more of just, here's your career history, and then a small bit at the end about Avatar. So the main interesting interviews have tended to be the ones with sort of Mike, Brian, and maybe Jeremy Zuckerman. But even his interview was a little low key, and there wasn't that much to it. It's just not as interesting as I felt an official podcast could be. Perhaps when Avatar Studios starts to release content, this will have a more interesting sort of insider content feel to it, in that when there is a proper news coming out, I can definitely see this podcast being able to maybe transition over to being more of an official news source. But right now, while they're doing just a standard recap thing, it does feel like just, an official fan podcast that happens to have a few contacts, rather than being a truly official podcast. The other point to mention on this is just that hugely disappointing live shows at the big conventions added to the sense that this podcast is basically completely aimed at sort of new or more casual fans, and not really for veteran fans at all. The fact that they have a spoiler policy on the podcast where they don't mention stuff past the episode that they're currently reviewing is pretty crazy for me, considering how old Avatar is at this point. That's just an absolutely baffling decision to me for the official podcast to take. Next, Avatar Legends role-playing game. Briefly mentioned it earlier on, but let's give it some time here. 2021 had a pretty slow second half, but the reveal and the Kickstarter campaign for Avatar Legends role-playing game made for a pretty exciting few weeks within the fandom. even if the game didn't interest you, it was still cool to see the numbers continue to go up and up as the campaign went on and hit all those stretch goals and made its way into like some of the top projects ever done on Kickstarter, and doing well for a role-playing game, and highlighting just how popular Avatar is. That there were still people by the end of the campaign just discovering that this thing existed. And you get the sense that, like, oh wow, if they'd given this just even a little bit more time, it could have done even better. So it really highlights that Avatar fans are just ravenous for new content, and the fact that this thing did as well as it did is actually a really exciting kind of prospect. Obviously, the only thing that sours it is the poor communication towards the end, announcing the large delay well after they probably should have, and just a few things in the middle of the campaign about like stretch goals. Not ideal, but this looks like it will have some new story content in the lore kind of details it's going to have, and we'll get that, I suppose, the PDF digital stuff early in the year, and that should be pretty exciting. The last piece of news I'm going to go over is just general like Avatar video game news. So the big one here was probably that an Avatar mobile game was announced as starting development from Square Enix Mobile. So again, you have to keep in mind here, it says Square Enix, but it's specifically Square Enix Mobile, which is different than sort of the main studio Square Enix. It is a mobile game and developed by a different studio. I think it is going to be pretty cool when it comes out, just because Avatar is so popular, and I suppose free-to-play Avatar game is going to be exciting, and it will get people's attention. Obviously, you don't want it to be overly heavily monetized, but that's just the way these mobile games are. It just is what it is. Beyond that, Avatar characters and content was featured in a few games, including Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2, probably most notably Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, a Smash Bros-esque game that featured a few characters. Smite had another Avatar event, as did Shop Titans. So again, just highlighting this was a year of heavy like marketing and merchandising for Avatar, and we saw that through Avatar beginning to make its way into more and more video games. And so the announcement of a Avatar video game, even if it is a mobile game, is still significant, and people are going to be talking. When it comes out, it's going to be the news of the day, unless they have something else going on at the time. Next, we move into the merchandise section. So straight away, I want to just make it clear here with the merchandise that I can't show off everything released this year. This year was crazy when it came to merchandise. There was just so much stuff that happened, from like t-shirts and pins and the stuff that we'd kind of had over the last few years that just like doubled, tripled this year. We had so many different action figure lines. This company now has the license and is doing this. This company is now doing a secondary line of other things. Everything happened this year. The only criticism you could probably have with this year in terms of merchandise is that not a lot of the stuff was Korra related, and we didn't maybe get like a really, I think, truly like one-off, giant, big, significant piece of merchandise that felt like it was must-have. Something like, say, the soundtrack would have been that, but it still hasn't happened yet. So, hopefully that does happen eventually. But let's get into the stuff that is sort of significant from the year. So I'll just briefly mention this. The Ultimate Blu-ray Collection was announced and released right at the end of the year. It, for the most part, is just a re-release of the previous two Avatar and Korra sets, but there's some art cards here with, again, the Kyoshi cover artist with some of her art, and you do get a bonus disc that has 2 extra features. As I covered in a previous news video, I didn't get the impression from what people were saying about these that this disc is worth buying the set again for. And overall, is it really the ultimate set? Probably not. It doesn't have the packaging level to go up against the Steelbook versions, and the extra content on that new disc is not enough to justify the relatively high price tag of this, considering otherwise it is just a re-release with slightly different packaging. So you know, it was something you kind of felt like they had to do in this year, do a re-release, but they didn't add enough in for, I think, fans who have the sets already to double dip, unless you were a hardcore collector who had the money to put down. Next, we move into a lot of basically action figure merchandise type stuff. So Funko Pops once again had a big year for Avatar. And we had a whole second wave, so a lot of the grouping of 5 here on the left, the Pop Super Aang, the Ozai, the Suki, the Ty Lee, and the Zhao, were all the commons for like basically wave 2 of Avatar Funko Pops, and then all the other ones on the right of the image were sort of the exclusives released throughout the year. There were also other pops that were announced but didn't actually release this year. The focus again here in this video is on the stuff that actually came out this year. So here's what we got. And I think some very, very nice additions. Yes, you can criticize the fact that perhaps there are 4 Aangs here, but the Super Aang is probably one of the pops of the year overall, and it was absolutely amazing. They needed to do a Book 3 Aang, so at least one of the Book 3 Aangs was absolutely needed. And I think the Spirit Aang is a very nice kind of redo as well, because we'll probably see more of that as we go through the other figures as well. Ozai as your main villain was absolutely needed, and there's another exclusive of him coming next year in more of a kind of battle kind of pose. Suki, Ty Lee, and Mei, 3 of your main female characters outside of, you know, Toph and Katara. Absolutely great additions to the collection. And then Zhao is always that character you wonder, like, will they do, won't they do? But they went for it. They did him plus an exclusive version that's slightly different. And so we have our Book 1 villain as well. And then there's also a Blue Spirit Zuko, because why wouldn't you do a Blue Spirit Zuko? Funko Pops look like they're going pretty well. This was definitely a year where it felt like, yeah, they're all in on Avatar now. I think we will see more regular kind of releases for Avatar Funko Pops. And it's just going to get more and more exciting as they go through, because they're going to get to a point where there are only so many more Aangs they can do. And they're going to need to get into more minor characters. So your Boomy, Zhongs, you know, Jets, those type of characters, we probably will be seeing them sooner rather than later. And I'm excited to see some of the more obscure characters get covered. Next, Diamond Select Toys has been probably the main company we've been focusing on for the last few years, and they had another pretty solid year. So in terms of their action figure line, they released Wave 3 and Wave 4 this year. Wave 3 was Ozai and Toph, the first ever Toph action figure that wasn't a Funko Pop, and Wave 4 was basically Final Battle Aang and Sokka. This was the year I definitely moved away from going all in on this line, just because other action figure stuff happened this year. But I did pick up the Toph, and it was a pretty good figure. The main reason I got it was because it is the first Toph figure. They slowed down a little bit with regards to like announcing more figures, and that we only learned about, I think, Wave 5, where we typically in the past had learned like 2 waves. And again, it's more of a waiting to see them get to more of the interesting characters that we've never seen before. But for me, the highlight of the year for Diamond Select continues to be the gallery diorama figures. So we got the Katara and the Zuko figures released this year after the Aang had come out last year. And these are just fantastic. I think definitely two of the most beautiful statues that we've seen. I just love the sculpting that they do. They go all out with the element bases, and the sculpt on the figures is probably the best that they've done as well. I'm super excited to see them announce the 4th figure, because I think we know there are a few more coming. I'm guessing it will be Toph next, but we have to wait and see on that. Next, QMX, a new company doing Avatar figures. They have kind of 2 separate lines of things. They have the Q Figs, which is the statue of Aang there, and then the Q Pals, which are plushes of the characters. This is, I think, all the stuff that actually released this year. They did also announce some other stuff, but it's more for, I think, early next year. So we have Q Pal, Aang, Sokka, and Katara, and then Q Fig Elite, Aang. I haven't got any of this stuff yet. I think I have the the Aang plush on pre-order, and then I've also recently ordered the Aang Q-Fig. So I'll have maybe more to say about this company later, but all the pictures make it seem like this is pretty high quality stuff, and it's definitely a company to look out for as they start to do more Q-Figs and stuff like that. So that's that. Next, another action figure line here, and this time it is Loyal Subjects, specifically their Best Action line. They ended up by the end of the year announcing quite a few Avatar figures, but the only two that actually released this year were the Book 1 Aang and then the Aang Monk, or Book 3 Aang, which I think came out right at the end of the year. It might not fully be out everywhere, but I think I've seen some places saying that they do have it in stock. Again, I haven't yet got one of these figures in hand, but they look to sort of be the best of both worlds compared to some of the figures that I have handled, and that they have the right amount of accessories, decent sculpt, they have good articulation, and they're not overly expensive. But I think QC perhaps is maybe the one issue with these, but again, I don't know about that until I get one of these in hand. Finally, on the action figure side of things, we have McFarlane Toys. This was probably the big announcement from the end of last year that McFarlane will be doing Avatar and Korra stuff. This year we saw them focus all on Avatar, so we didn't see any of their Korra stuff. That I'm guessing that will be maybe next year. So on the right here you can see their smaller scale figures here with lower points of articulation, but interestingly this line includes a size class for animal figures. So far it's just the Appa, but the Appa is definitely one of the standout figures from the year. I think these figures are fine for what they are. They're smaller scale, cheaper. They don't come with a lot of accessories, but they're nicely sculpted and they are good for their size. They're not going to blow you away in terms of how amazing as action figures they are, but they are nice representations of the characters. They then later announced their 6-inch line, which is more what you expect from McFarlane, as well as a statue of Aang. I only recently got my 6-inch figures. I think I'll probably have a review of them coming within the next few days. But they look, again, pretty good. Articulation seems a lot better than the smaller scale stuff. But they seem to have a little bit more gone a little bit more wild with the facial expressions. And again, the same kind of problem of not a lot of accessories, even though they're kind of bigger figures. Again, I'm interested to see how things are going forward. The other criticism you could perhaps have about a lot of the insane amount of action figure lines is just that every single place has to start with the same characters, the same designs of characters, so you know what your wave 1, 2, 3 for almost every line is going to be. And you have to ask yourself the question, do I want Book 1 Aang from every single action figure line? And typically the answer probably has to be no, you don't. You want to wait until you get the version that you do want. Like for me, where's our first Book 3 Katara action figure? We've had a statue, but where's the Funko Pop for Book 3 Katara? Where's the action figures for Book 3 Katara? But we'll move on. In terms of other merchandise, this is just a selection of the other significant stuff that I think that came out from the year. Avatar Monopoly was announced and revealed right towards the end of the year. Very cool sort of tie-in here. We have Avatar Fig Pins, had I think the first 2 waves released. They're pretty cool. The Funko Pop Pins also did some Avatar stuff here, including a Chase Aang, which is pretty nice as well. And then I just want to briefly mention just the Topps sort of on-demand Avatar set, which was a pretty cool collectible thing throughout the year. I think a lot of people missed out on this, but hopefully it will lead to more trading card style stuff for Avatar coming down the line. So merchandise was great all year. The only thing, like I said, the lack of Korra stuff was felt, but I'm guessing for the 10-year anniversary next year, we'll maybe see a little bit more Korra stuff overall. And then the lack of something big, like say a soundtrack or something like that, was kind of significant. But you have highlight figures from the year, like the Pop Super Aang with all elements, the Appa figure, and then you had a lot of statues, really nice statues to choose from this year. So merchandising was great. Now, this is sort of a new thing that I just thought I'd do here to more, again, get across the year for me as a content maker. So, channel update for the year. Very weird year for the channel. After Avatar Studios, I expected I would have a chance at hitting my current goal of 10,000 subscribers. But with no follow-up news for Avatar Studios, I noticed no real significant growth beyond the sort of usual, I'm an active channel, so I gain subscribers at a slow-ish rate. In terms of numbers this year, I gained around 700-ish subscribers in 2021. This is in comparison to the 2,700 subscribers I gained in 2020. This, I think, very much highlights that the influx of people back into the fandom because Avatar returning to Netflix was more significant than just the Avatar Studios announcement, and that it's going to take Avatar Studios actually announcing something specifically for me to see a similar growth like that. And I think that's what the numbers tell me here, is that the lack of significant story content over the course of the year, the lack of any of the announcements having any information to even speculate about, meant I had very little opportunity to do what I'm good at on my channel, which is speculation, analysis, detailed discussion. And unfortunately, a lot of the books that came out this year, while good, allowed for me to do a review, a podcast review, and that's really about it. The lack of a novel was definitely felt. That's another thing that I think helped boost my subscribers in the last 2 years, was my heavy coverage of the Kyoshi books and people appreciating the depth that I went into on such a big piece of Avatar content. It definitely was a year where I felt like I was sort of wasted a little bit by not having anything really to cover. That because I've been doing this for so long, I've probably done a video that you would maybe suggest like a few years ago on the channel that there probably isn't really much to add on to in the meantime. And so I was stuck a lot of the year with just like covering the basic updates of news and not really having anything to dive into. And that's why I'm really hoping that for 2022 we get the more significant news. They finally announced some books where we can speculate about it, because I talked about the books that we know about for next year. There's nothing to speculate with them. The Chibi comic is a Chibi comic. We don't even know if it's canon. The Free comic, we won't know anything until the cover and the proper description come out. Patterns in Time, we likely won't know anything about that until much closer to the release, because it's a short story collection. And then Beasts of the Four Nations, we probably should have had some more significant information already, but because it's been such a mess of a release in terms of the announcement, we don't even know the exact details of how much new stuff there's going to be in it or not. When these books come out, I'll have something to cover. But until we get, like, say, another novel announcement and we know about the big comic books, I'm not sure about if 2022 is going to be that much different than this year. I'm really, really hoping Avatar Studios will have an announcement at one of the Comic-Cons, or maybe at the next February Viacom event, because I think we definitely need it. We need something to change, because you announced Avatar Studios, and then outside of merchandising, the year didn't feel like it was the follow-up to the big announcement like that. Not at all. So, in conclusion, a very frustrating year for Avatar. The contrast between the reaction to Avatar Studios and how the whole rest of the year went was stark, to say the least. We got crazy excited for Avatar Studios, only to see no follow-up or really any significant new content announcement over the course of the year. It was a strong year for merchandise, with the only weakness being the lack of Korra across the board, but that should be hopefully fixed next year for the 10-year anniversary. The big issue is that for the second year in a row, we end the year not knowing about the future of the comics or the novels. Speaking of novels, I guess, I mentioned it again, after 2 years of having novels, I definitely really felt not having a big, impactful piece of content this year on multiple fronts, that the books that we got just were not enough to make up for the fact that we didn't have one of these, and then the fact that there wasn't even any news this year really about novels. Like, there's one little bit of news like teasing that we might get a novel next year, but again, until it actually gets confirmed, it's hard to really read into that stuff too much. And that's the big thing here. Like, Avatar Studios was the most memorable thing this year, but it's also surprisingly forgettable because there's so little substance to the actual announcement. The bigger issue, I think, this year, because we weren't really expecting anything huge from Avatar Studios because it was just the initial announcement, was what I say there at the end, that I talked last year in my kind of year in review, my preview kind of video for this year, about surely this has to be the year where we finally learn about what's next for Korra comics, like the next Korra comic trilogy. We still don't have that. Yes, we got Patterns in Time, but Patterns in Time is not what we were really looking forward to necessarily. Because again, Team Avatar Tales was not a great book, and this is the exact same format just with Korra. I have confidence that they'll do it better, but the history with these type of books is that they can be a little bit hit and miss. And where is the mainline content? That's what I come out of this year remembering. Remembering a big announcement that is something that we'll only really see the result of in like 2 years. A lot of merchandise, none of which is like hugely memorable. And then content that is okay, and news surrounding content that is just okay. And that is not a great thing for a year where you do announce the future of the franchise, to not really have any immediate follow-up to that. That's why 2022, not getting too far into the speculation here, the thing it needs to do is just to feel like this is a truly active franchise. This was a year where it kind of half felt like that and then half didn't. 2022 needs to get it fully back on track. So that's where we're basically going to end the video. In the comments, of course, let me know what your thoughts are on the whole year. What for you was your thoughts on the content, story content this year and the books? What were the key pieces of news for you? What was the key merchandise for you? And overall, how do you feel 2021 was for Avatar? And then, we'll just round off by saying a big thank you to my Avatar tier channel members, Cash D's, Martine Monterosa, and Brittany M. Thanks for supporting the channel. But other than that, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.